There comes a moment when a man realizes the world has turned cold toward him. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. Doors hesitate before opening. Voices lose warmth. Resistance appears where there was once ease. He assumes the world has changed. It has not. What changed was him. In ancient systems, this moment had a name. It was not called failure. It was called loss of honor. Honor was never a moral decoration. It was a structural force, an invisible architecture that held a man upright when fear entered his chest and pressure bent his spine. Without it, even the strong collapse slowly. This story follows a man who does not know when he lost his center, only that life began to push back afterward. And it follows the quiet mentor who does not comfort him, but shows him something older than motivation. A path. A path where discipline replaces emotion, where silence becomes armor, where presence outweighs explanation. The samurai knew this truth. The Stoics warned of it. Modern men forgot it. When you lack honor, the world does not punish you out of cruelty. It simply responds, mechanically, predictably, without emotion. This is not a story about becoming better. It is about becoming anchored. And once you see how the ancient system worked, you will understand why everything began turning against you. The moment your inner order collapsed. Chapter 1, the day resistance appeared. Resistance never announces itself with violence. It arrives politely, almost apologetically. At first, it feels like friction in places that once moved smoothly. Conversations slow. Words that used to land now drift past their target. People listen, but not fully. Decisions that once felt obvious now carry weight, hesitation, consequence. The man senses it in his body before he understands it in thought. Something is heavier. He does what modern men are taught to do. He explains himself. He adjusts his tone. He becomes more reasonable, more flexible, more agreeable. He believes friction is a misunderstanding, and misunderstanding can be corrected with clarity. It doesn't work. The more he compensates, the more the resistance spreads. Meetings end without resolution. Promises thin out. Respect fades not dramatically but quietly, like warmth leaving a room. Psychology has a name for this phenomenon: loss of internal coherence. When a man's inner standards loosen, his nervous system begins broadcasting uncertainty. Micro delays in speech, slight collapses in posture, overcorrections in behavior. These signals are ancient. Long before language, humans survived by reading instability in others. The brain still does this automatically. The man does not know this. He only knows something is wrong. That is when the mentor appears. Not as a savior, not as a guide offering comfort, but as a presence that does not rush to fix the situation. The mentor watches, listens, allows the man to speak until his explanations circle back on themselves. Silence stretches between them. The mentor finally speaks, not to soothe, but to reframe. This resistance, he says, is not punishment. The man stiffens. He wants fairness. He wants a reason. It is feedback. The word lands differently. Feedback implies a system. Systems do not hate, they respond. In ancient warrior cultures, this response was understood as law, not moral law, structural law. When inner discipline dissolved, the world applied pressure automatically, like weight finding a weak joint. The mentor does not accuse. Accusation would trigger defense. Instead, he asks a question that unsettles the man more than criticism ever could. When did you stop deciding who you were before entering the world? The man searches his memory. There is no single moment, only a gradual drift, small compromises made for ease, boundaries softened to avoid conflict, principles negotiated to maintain harmony. Neuroscience confirms what the ancients observed. Decision fatigue erodes authority. When identity is not pre-decided, every interaction becomes a negotiation, and negotiation leaks power. Fear rises in the man, not fear of danger, but fear of exposure. He realizes he has been improvising his identity in public, adjusting himself in response to pressure instead of meeting pressure with structure. The mentor nods, as if reading his thoughts. Fear is not your enemy, he says. Drift is. Fear sharpens when discipline exists. Drift dulls everything. The samurai trained posture before sword, breath before combat, code before conflict. Not to eliminate fear, but to ensure fear never led. The man understands something painful. The world did not turn against him randomly. It simply responded to his loss of internal order. And systems always respond. He feels the first crack in his ego. Not humiliation, but recognition. The quiet realization that strength was never about force or confidence, but about alignment. The mentor stands, preparing to leave. This is only the surface, he says. If you want to understand why resistance follows disorder everywhere, you must see the system beneath it. To understand resistance, the man must first understand the ancient system that governs it. That night the man does not sleep easily. Not because of fear, but because something has been named. When a pattern is unnamed, it feels like chaos. Once named, it becomes a system. And systems demand accountability. He replays moments he once dismissed as coincidence. The meeting where his opinion was ignored. The relationship where his boundaries were tested repeatedly. The subtle way people spoke over him instead of with him. None of it was dramatic enough to protest. That was the trap. Modern life trains men to look for explosions. Ancient systems warned about erosion. The mentor's words echo. When did you stop deciding who you were before entering the world? From a psychological standpoint, this question cuts deep. Identity, when not internally governed, becomes externally regulated. The brain seeks equilibrium. If a man does not impose structure on himself, his environment will impose it for him. This is not oppression. It is efficiency. The man remembers when he used to wake with clarity, not optimism, but direction, back when his standards were simple and non-negotiable. Over time, he traded those standards for flexibility. Flexibility became adaptability. Adaptability became drift. He mistook drift for growth. Ancient discipline systems warned against this exact confusion. Zen monasteries restricted choice not to control monks, but to protect them from dilution. Stoic practice emphasized premeditation not to remove uncertainty, but to prevent hesitation. The mentor meets him again at dawn. No greeting, no encouragement. They walk in silence. Silence does something modern language cannot. It removes the illusion that everything needs commentary. The man becomes aware of his breathing, shallow and irregular. Stress physiology at work. The sympathetic nervous system, the same system that responds to threat, is constantly active in men who lack internal boundaries. Chronic vigilance without discipline becomes anxiety. The mentor stops. Notice your posture, he says. The man straightens instinctively. That adjustment, the mentor continues, is the beginning of honor. Honor, in its original form, was never about morality. It was about load-bearing capacity, how much pressure a man could carry without deforming. The samurai understood that a man who collapses internally under observation will collapse externally under conflict. That collapse invites interference. Systems, people, hierarchies, all respond to weakness the same way gravity responds to imbalance. The mentor explains something the man was never taught. Consistency is interpreted as authority long before competence is measured. Modern behavioral science supports this. Predictable behavior under stress signals reliability. Reliability attracts trust. Trust reduces friction. The absence of honor increases friction everywhere. The man begins to see his recent life not as a series of unfair events, but as a predictable outcome of internal looseness. He had been bending to avoid tension, and tension simply moved elsewhere. The mentor's final lesson of the chapter is quiet, almost surgical. You believed harmony came from being liked, he says. Harmony comes from being aligned. Alignment is uncomfortable. It creates early resistance. People push back against structure before they respect it. This is why men without discipline feel short-term ease and long-term suffocation, while disciplined men experience short-term resistance and long-term stability. The man understands now. Resistance did not appear because he was doing something wrong. It appeared because he stopped doing something right. The mentor leaves him with no instructions, no techniques, no motivation, only a warning. Until you rebuild your internal system, he says, the world will continue applying pressure, not to punish you, but to compensate for what you no longer enforce. The man watches the horizon brighten. For the first time in months, the resistance feels intelligible, and intelligible problems can be confronted. To confront resistance, the man must now understand the ancient system that once prevented it. Chapter 2. Honor as an ancient system. The mentor does not begin with advice. Advice belongs to men who still believe choice is their primary problem. Instead, he begins with history. Honor, he says, was never about being seen as good. They sit beneath old trees, roots exposed, gripping stone. The mentor traces one with his finger, slow and deliberate. In every warrior system that survived chaos, he continues, honor functioned as internal law, not emotion, not reputation. Law. The man listens differently now. Resistance has taught him humility. In samurai culture, honor was not debated, it was installed. Before a blade was ever lifted, a code was engraved into behavior. Discipline preceded skill because skill without structure collapses under fear. Modern neuroscience confirms what these systems intuited. Under stress, the prefrontal cortex, the seat of reasoning, weakens. The nervous system defaults to conditioned responses. In men without internal law, those responses are emotional, reactive, improvisational. The samurai did not improvise identity. They reduced variability. Silence was one such reduction. Silence conserved signal. It prevented unnecessary data leakage. Every word spoken under pressure reveals position. Every explanation offers leverage. The ancient warrior treated speech as exposure. The mentor tells a parable. A young warrior once asked his master why he was forbidden to explain himself during accusation. Because, the master replied, if your conduct requires explanation, your code has already failed. The man feels the weight of that sentence. In Stoic systems, the same principle appeared under different language. Epictetus taught that events are neutral, but judgment creates suffering. The discipline was not to control the world, but to govern response. Control response, and the world loses leverage. Honor was that governance made visible. The mentor explained something uncomfortable. Modern men outsource authority constantly, to emotion, to consensus, to validation. They ask, how does this feel? How will this look? Will this be accepted? Ancient systems asked one question only. Is this aligned? Alignment removed negotiation. Behavioral science labels this as internal locus of control. Men with strong internal standards experience less cognitive load. Decisions are faster, posture stabilizes, voice steadies, the body stops broadcasting uncertainty. What you call confidence, the mentor says, is often just the absence of internal debate. The man recognizes himself in the critique. He had been negotiating with himself publicly, adjusting mid-sentence, softening conclusions, trying to manage perception instead of structure. That made him readable. And what is readable is manageable. The samurai understood hierarchy differently than modern men. They did not resent it, they trained for it. Hierarchy was not oppression. It was orientation. A man without position drifted until someone assigned him one. Honor prevented assignment. It acted as internal architecture. When pressure arrived, the structure held. When fear surged, behavior did not deform. This coherence created gravity. Others felt it without understanding it. The mentor stands. Your life did not become difficult because you lacked talent, he says. It became difficult because you lacked law. The man feels something shift, not relief, responsibility. An internal system cannot be borrowed. It must be built. And building it will require restraint, silence, and decisions made before pressure arrives. To build internal law, the man must now learn why silence and restraint terrify the unstructured and empower the disciplined. The mentor does not romanticize the past. Romance softens discipline. Ancient systems were brutal, he says, not because men were cruel, but because reality was. In environments where survival depended on reliability, men could not afford emotional improvisation. A single lapse in discipline endangered the whole formation. This is why honor was enforced internally before it was ever tested externally. The man begins to see honor differently now, not as pride, but as compression resistance. In engineering, structures are tested not by ideal conditions, but by load. Under weight, weak materials bend, strong ones hold shape. Honor functioned the same way. It was not proven in comfort, but in pressure. Modern psychology offers language for this ancient truth. Under stress, humans revert to default patterns. These patterns are trained, not chosen. If a man has trained emotional release, he will release. If he has trained silence, he will contain. Containment changes everything. The mentor explains that silence was never meant to impress others. It was meant to stabilize the self. When emotion surges and no outlet is permitted, it must reorganize internally. Over time, this trains mastery. This is why monks sat in stillness, why samurai knelt before battle, why Stoics practiced voluntary discomfort. They were not chasing calm, they were training presence under threat. The man remembers moments when silence felt unbearable, not because it was empty, but because it exposed inner disorder. Words had been his escape, explanation his anesthesia. The mentor names the danger plainly. Men who speak to relieve tension teach the world that tension controls them. Behavioral research confirms this. Emotional leakage signals low threat tolerance. Others adjust accordingly. They probe, push, test, not consciously, instinctively. This is why honor systems eliminated unnecessary expression. They were not suppressing humanity, they were protecting structure. The samurai code demanded that decisions be made before emotion arrived. This removed hesitation. Hesitation is the window through which influence enters. The man realizes how often he hesitated publicly, checking reactions, gauging approval, recalibrating. Each adjustment had felt intelligent, strategic. It was surrender disguised as nuance. The mentor introduces a final parable. Two men stand before a locked gate. One knocks repeatedly, explaining why he deserves entry. The other stands still, silent, unmoving. The gate opens for the second. Not because he demanded it, the mentor says, but because the gate recognized weight. Weight is not volume. It is density. A man with internal law moves less, speaks less, reacts less. But when he does act, the action carries consequence. Systems learn this quickly. Resistance decreases, not because the man is aggressive, but because he is expensive to test. The man feels the implications settle in his body. Honor is not loud. It does not announce itself. It rearranges the environment quietly. This is why modern culture undermines it. A population governed internally is difficult to manipulate externally. Emotionally reactive men are easier to steer. Disciplined men require confrontation. The mentor's voice lowers. This is why you were encouraged to outsource your authority, he says, to feelings, to narratives, to approval. The man sees the trade clearly now. Comfort for coherence, flexibility for erosion. He understands the cost. To rebuild honor, he must accept early resistance. Silence will be misunderstood. Restraint will be challenged. The unstructured will interpret discipline as arrogance. That is the price of internal law. The mentor steps back, his role nearly complete. Now what he says, you must see the contrast, not in theory. In flesh and behavior, there are two kinds of men moving through every system, he continues. One leaks, one contains. The man knows which he has been and which he must become. To understand the cost of dishonor and the power of containment, the man must now confront the two archetypes that shape every hierarchy. Chapter 3. The Dishonored Man and the Silent Warrior. The mentor does not introduce the archetypes as metaphors. He introduces them as realities. They are moving around you every day, he says. You just haven't learned to see them. They sit in a public place now, ordinary, unremarkable. People pass without noticing either of them. The mentor gestures subtly, not pointing, not staring. Watch, he says. The man begins to notice patterns. One figure speaks often, filling silence quickly, adjusting tone mid-sentence. He laughs before others do. He explains himself even when no explanation is asked for. His body leans forward, seeking alignment, approval, agreement. This, the mentor says, is the dishonored man. The word is not moral, it is structural. The dishonored man believes expression equals strength. He was taught that visibility is power, that being understood is safety. He confuses openness with authority. When pressure appears, he responds immediately, clarifying, justifying, negotiating. Neuroscience explains why this fails. Rapid emotional expression reduces perceived threat. It tells the observer, this man needs resolution, and what needs resolution can be controlled. The dishonored man leaks. He leaks information through tone, posture, timing. He reveals where pressure lands. Others do not exploit this maliciously. They simply adapt. Pressure increases because the system senses elasticity. The mentor's voice remains calm. He is not weak because he feels, he says. He is weak because he cannot contain. Containment is the difference. The mentor shifts the man's attention to another figure, quieter, still. His posture is neutral, his speech minimal. When spoken to, he responds without hurry. When challenged, he does not rush to resolve discomfort. This, the mentor says, is the silent warrior. The silent warrior does not perform dominance. He does not seek attention. His presence is felt because it is unbroken. He allows silence to exist. He allows misunderstanding to linger. His nervous system is not hijacked by the need to correct perception. Modern psychology calls this emotional regulation. Ancient systems called it mastery. The silent warrior is not fearless. Fear passes through him like weather through a mountain range. It does not redirect him. This is why silence unsettles people. Silence removes feedback. Without feedback, others cannot adjust. They test gently at first. If the structure holds, they withdraw. The man feels something uncomfortable rise within him. He recognizes how often he rushed to ease tension, how quickly he tried to smooth edges, how deeply he feared being misread. The mentor speaks again. The dishonored man seeks peace immediately, he says. The warrior seeks alignment first. Peace comes later, or not at all. The man sees the pattern everywhere now, in work, in relationships, in himself. The dishonored man adapts constantly. He calls it flexibility. Over time, adaptation without core becomes erosion. Boundaries blur, standards soften, authority dissolves. The warrior adapts strategically. His core remains fixed. Adaptation occurs around it, not through it. Behavioral science confirms this distinction. Individuals with stable internal rules experience lower stress responses under ambiguity. They do not need immediate closure. Their physiology remains coherent. Coherence is perceived as strength. The mentor does not glorify the warrior. He warns of the cost. Silence will make you lonely, he says. Restraint will invite projection. People will label you cold because they cannot read you. The man understands now. Those labels are defensive. They protect the ego of the uncontained. The dishonored man resents the warrior because the warrior reflects what discipline looks like. And discipline is unforgiving. The mentor's final words in this part are precise. You cannot imitate silence, he says. Silence without structure is avoidance. Silence with structure is command. The man feels the distinction settle, not intellectually, but physically. For the first time, he sees why he has been tested repeatedly, and why he failed those tests without knowing they existed. To complete the transformation, the man must now confront why history and human nature always select against men who abandon their code. The mentor asks the man to do nothing, not to respond, not to correct, not to perform strength, just to hold. They return to the same places, the same conversations, the same pressures. The difference now is not circumstance, it is containment. The man feels the urge rise immediately, the familiar reflex to explain, to soften, to preempt misunderstanding. His body tightens, his breath shortens. This is not weakness surfacing, it is conditioning being challenged. The mentor names it. This is withdrawal, he says, from your old addiction to release. Modern neuroscience explains the sensation. Emotional expression releases dopamine and cortisol together, temporary relief paired with long-term erosion. Containment denies that release. The nervous system protests. It mistakes restraint for danger. Ancient systems trained men to stay anyway. The man begins to notice the shift. When he does not rush to fill silence, others do. When he does not negotiate boundaries in real time, pressure pauses. Some people grow uncomfortable. A few grow irritated. Most recalibrate. This is the invisible education of hierarchy. In predator-prey dynamics, the animal that moves first reveals intent. The one that moves last controls the encounter. The dishonored man reacts to facial shifts, tone changes, micro-signals. The warrior absorbs them. He decides later, if at all. The mentor explains that hierarchy is not established through dominance displays, but through response latency. Who needs immediate resolution? Who can wait? Waiting is expensive. It requires internal stability. The man sees now why he was interrupted, why he was challenged casually, why his time was treated as elastic. Elastic things are stretched. The warrior is not elastic. He does not announce boundaries, he embodies them. When crossed, consequence appears, not emotionally, not dramatically, but structurally. Access reduces, effort redirects, attention withdraws. This is how power actually operates. The dishonored man believes power must be asserted. The warrior understands power is felt. It emerges from coherence over time. The body recognizes it before the mind justifies it. The mentor cautions him again. This will cost you comfort, he says. You will lose people who benefited from your leakage. The man understands. Some relationships were built on his permeability. When permeability ends, so does the arrangement. Stoic philosophy warned of this loss. Epictetus taught that freedom begins when we accept the loss of what does not belong to us. Samurai culture went further. It treated such loss as purification. The man notices another change. His inner dialogue quiets, fewer internal negotiations. Decisions arrive faster, not because they are easier, but because fewer options are permitted. This is the hidden gift of discipline. Choice decreases, clarity increases. The dishonored man lives in constant evaluation. Am I liked? Was that correct? Should I adjust? The warrior lives in execution. Is this aligned? If yes, proceed. If not, refuse. Refusal is where most men collapse. Refusal creates friction. Friction reveals hierarchy. This is why unstructured men avoid it. They sense, correctly, that refusal will test them. The mentor watches the man refuse something small, calmly, without explanation. Nothing explodes. The world adjusts. This is the final lesson of the archetypes. The dishonored man survives by minimizing tension. The warrior survives by holding it. One is drained slowly. The other accumulates gravity. The man understands now why silence unnerves people. Silence forces others to confront themselves. Many cannot. They project, they accuse, they test. The warrior does not correct their projections. He lets them exhaust themselves against his stillness. This is not cruelty. It is conservation. The mentor prepares to leave again. "You have seen the contrast," he says. "Now you must understand the cost of abandoning it." The man looks around. The world feels sharper, less friendly, more real. He is no longer confused by resistance. He expects it. To understand why this discipline has always been necessary, the man must now face the verdict of history and human nature. Chapter 4. The Verdict of History. The mentor does not speak of history as a sequence of events. He speaks of it as a filter. What survives, he says, is what can hold pressure. They walk through a place marked by time, stone worn smooth by footsteps, wood darkened by generations of hands. The mentor explains that every ancient system worth studying was forged under one question: what kind of man endures when comfort disappears? Bushido was not poetry. Stoicism was not reflection. They were survival architectures. The man listens as the mentor describes how warrior cultures observed the same pattern repeating across centuries. Men without internal law collapsed under stress. Not dramatically, gradually. They traded discipline for relief, principle for convenience, silence for expression. History did not punish them. It simply replaced them. The mentor explains that societies do not fall because of enemies first. They fall because internal coherence dissolves. Once the inner code weakens, external pressure finishes the process. Modern science mirrors this truth. Systems theory shows that any structure without internal regulation becomes reactive. Reactive systems burn energy responding instead of directing. Over time, they fail. The man feels the weight of this realization. He has lived reactively, responding to moods, expectations, signals. He mistook responsiveness for intelligence. The mentor corrects him. Responsiveness without hierarchy is chaos, he says. A warrior responds only to what matters. They stop. The mentor looks directly at him. Human nature has not changed, he continues. Only the environment has become softer. That softness hides consequences until it doesn't. Predators still exist. They no longer wear armor. They wear patience. They watch for men who explain themselves, who seek agreement, who bleed emotion into the open. The dishonored man believes predators are aggressive. History shows the opposite. The most dangerous figures were controlled, restrained, and observant. They waited for weakness to present itself. Weakness always announces itself. Through haste, through noise, through inconsistency. The mentor explains that ancient training focused on reducing these signals, not to deceive others, but to stabilize the self. When a man's internal state is predictable, his external behavior becomes reliable. Reliability creates trust. Trust creates authority. Authority attracts either loyalty or challenge. Both are manageable. The man sees now why modern men feel surrounded by hostility. It is not hostility, it is testing. Every environment tests for structure. When structure is absent, pressure increases. The mentor's voice lowers. The world turns against men who cannot hold themselves, he says, not out of cruelty, out of necessity. Nature does not negotiate, it selects. The man understands now why drift was named the true enemy. Drift erodes alignment slowly. By the time resistance becomes obvious, the system has already marked the man as unstable. The mentor leaves him with a final reflection for this part. Honor was never about being good, he says. It was about being unbreakable under observation. The man stands alone, surrounded by the quiet weight of what has endured. He knows now that discipline is not an aesthetic. It is a requirement. To complete the verdict, the man must confront what happens when discipline is restored and what is demanded when the old self can no longer return. The mentor returns only once more, not to instruct, not to correct, but to confirm what the man has already begun to embody. They stand without ceremony. No lesson announced, no framework introduced. The mentor studies him the way one studies a structure after stress has been applied, not for appearance, but for fractures. You feel different, the mentor says. Not stronger, quieter. The man does not answer immediately. He no longer fills silence to prove comprehension. He waits until the response aligns. Yes, he says, because fewer things reach me now. The mentor nods. This is the final threshold. History, he explains, does not reward men who change temporarily. It selects for men who stabilize. Most awaken briefly during crisis, humiliation, loss, then regress once comfort returns. Ancient systems anticipated this weakness. That is why Bushidō demanded daily ritual. That is why Stoicism emphasized repetition over insight. That is why mastery was never emotional. The mentor explains the last pattern history reveals. Men do not fail because discipline is hard. They fail because discipline removes excuses. Once structure is restored, responsibility becomes unavoidable. The dishonored man could blame confusion. The warrior can blame nothing. This is why many abandon the path quietly, not in rebellion, but in erosion, a skipped standard, a softened boundary, a justified exception. Over time, the code becomes decorative. History does not record these men. The mentor gestures toward the world beyond them. Pressure will return, he says. It always does, but now it will feel different. Pressure no longer feels like attack. It feels like confirmation, a signal that the system is being tested and holding. Modern psychology supports this shift. When internal rules are clear, ambiguity no longer spikes anxiety. The brain conserves energy. Decision fatigue dissolves. Presence sharpens. The man notices it daily now. Conversations are shorter, eye contact is steadier, challenges arrive less frequently, but when they do, they are direct. Predators avoid uncertain outcomes. The mentor speaks the final warning. Do not advertise this change, he says. Power that announces itself invites correction. Let the world discover you slowly. The man understands. Honor is not declared, it is inferred. He reflects on the opening confusion, when everything felt heavier, resistant, misaligned. He sees it now for what it was. Feedback, the world responding to internal disorder. That disorder is gone, not because life softened, but because structure returned. The mentor turns to leave. This is where I stop, he says, not because the path ends, but because guidance must. The man does not ask him to stay. He stands alone again. But this time, the solitude does not feel like absence. It feels like alignment. Silence surrounds him, not as emptiness, but as readiness. He understands the final truth. History teaches every man who survives it. When honor dissolves, everything turns against you. When honor is restored, the world does not serve you. It respects distance, and distance is freedom. A man without an internal code is shaped by pressure. A man with discipline becomes the pressure that shapes the world.